The key turned in the lock with a sound like a bone snapping. A wet, metallic click that echoed in the tiny entryway. I pushed the door open, my shoulder bumping the frame, and a wave of familiar air washed over me. Not fresh air, the air of my apartment. It smelled of old wood, dust, and the faint, sour tang of last night's takeout. Home. Rain lashed against the single window, a frantic drumming that had been my soundtrack for the entire commute. Outside, Chicago was drowning. Inside, it was just stuffy. I kicked the door shut, the deadbolt sliding home with a heavy, satisfying thunk. Security. My own little box, sealed off from the world. My coat was heavy with water. I shrugged it off, the damp wool scratching my neck, and threw it over the back of the only chair that wasn't covered in a week's worth of mail. My keys landed on the small kitchen counter with a clatter. They skidded across the laminate and came to rest next to a greasy pizza box, a monument to my own laziness. The place was a mess. It was always a mess. Data entry grinds you down, turns your brain to a gray paste by 5 o'clock. The last thing I wanted to do was clean. All I wanted was a beer and the mindless hum of the television. The old radiator in the corner started its nightly ritual, a series of pings and hisses and a deep, rattling groan, like an old man clearing his throat. The lights overhead flickered once, twice, then held steady, a pale yellow light that made the peeling paint on the walls look jaundiced. I moved through the small living space, my footsteps heavy on the creaking floorboards. It was a pre-war building, which was a nice way of saying everything was one good slam away from collapsing. The walls were thin. I could often hear my neighbors' arguments, their television shows, the muffled rhythm of their lives bleeding into mine. I grabbed a beer from the fridge. The cold bottle was a shock against my warm palm. I twisted the cap off and took a long swallow, leaning against the counter. The rain kept coming down, a solid sheet of water against the glass. My window didn't look out onto much. Just a dark, narrow alley, the brick wall of the next building so close I could almost touch it. Tonight, it was a black void swallowing the rain. Another drink. The tension in my shoulders began to unknot, just a little. The day's numbers and spreadsheets started to recede. This was the routine, the decompression. Shut the world out. Let the background noise of the apartment become a kind of white noise. The rattling radiator, the drumming rain, the buzz of the refrigerator's compressor kicking on. I was halfway to the couch, ready to sink into the cushions and forget the world existed, when my phone buzzed. It vibrated against the countertop where I'd left it, a harsh, insistent buzz that cut through the apartment's familiar sounds. I sighed. Probably work. A text from my boss about some file I'd forgotten to upload. I walked back, wiping condensation from the beer bottle onto my jeans. The screen lit up. Not a text. A call. Unknown number. My thumb hovered over the red icon. 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. In a storm. Who the hell? A telemarketer working late? I almost declined it. I should have declined it. But some flicker of irritation, of wanting to tell someone off for bothering me, made me swipe the green icon instead. Hello? I said, my voice flat, static. A crackling digital hiss, like a bad connection frying itself. There was a sound underneath it. A wet, ragged noise, like someone was breathing too close to the microphone, their lungs full of water. Hello? I repeated, louder this time. Annoyance was turning into impatience. If this is a sales call, you've got the worst timing in history. The breathing sound hitched. It became a gasp, a desperate, shuddering intake of air, and then A voice. It was shredded, torn. Every word seemed to claw its way out of a throat constricted by pure terror, but it was the sound of it, the pitch, the cadence. A cold spike drove itself right through the base of my skull. My blood froze. It was my voice. "Don't!" The voice on the phone choked out. It was me. It was unmistakably, impossibly me. But a version of me who had just seen the end of the world. It was thin, reedy, broken. My own throat went dry. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just stood there gripping the phone, the cold of the beer bottle forgotten in my other hand. How can this be? "Listen to me," my own voice pleaded, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush, tripping over sobs. "Listen. You have to listen to me." My mind went blank. This is impossible. It was a recording. A prank. It had to be a prank. But the sound was too real. The panic was too real. I could hear the wetness of tears in the words. I could hear the air being sucked in between panicked phrases. "What is this?" I managed to whisper. My own voice sounded alien in the room. The voice on the phone didn't hear me. It was a one-way transmission of horror. "Don't answer the door!" it screamed, the voice cracking, dissolving into a high-pitched wail of agony. "No matter what you hear, don't open the door! For the love of God, do not!" The line went dead. An abrupt click. Then, nothing. Just the low hum of the dial tone. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear. My hand was shaking. I stared at the dark screen, at my own faint reflection staring back. My face was pale, my eyes wide. I looked like I'd seen a ghost. Silence. The familiar sounds of the apartment rushed back in to fill the void, but they were different now. Tainted. The rattling of the radiator was no longer comforting. It sounded like bones chattering. The drumming of the rain was no longer a lullaby. It was a warning. My heart was pounding. I could hear it, a frantic, heavy thudding in my own chest, loud enough to shake my ribs. I took a shaky breath. And another. A joke. It has to be a joke. What the hell is going on? My friends weren't this cruel. And the technology, to fake a voice that perfectly, that level of raw, unhinged fear, it was an utter absurdity. I put the phone down on the counter, my fingers leaving damp prints on the screen. My eyes darted around the small room, the locked door, the single dark window, the shadows in the corners that seemed deeper now, darker. I was completely alone. I knew I was. There was absolutely no one. But a cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. My muscles were tensed up, coiled like springs. I felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing my chest, making the air thick and hard to draw into my lungs. My gaze was fixed on the front door, the heavy wood, the brass deadbolt I had slid into place myself. It was solid, secure. Nothing could get through it unless I let it. "Don't open the door." The words echoed in my head, a verbatim recording of my own panicked scream. They circled and circled, a vulture of a thought. I swallowed hard, my throat clicking. I tried to laugh it off, a dry, humorless puff of air. It was a prank. A stupid, elaborate prank. In a minute, my phone would ring again, and it would be one of my idiot friends from college, laughing his head off. I waited. 1 second. 2. The radiator gave a loud clang, and I jumped, a jolt of electricity shooting up my spine. My beer bottle slipped from my hand and shattered on the linoleum floor. Brown glass and pale foam spread in a puddle at my feet. I didn't even look down. My eyes were still locked on the door, holding my breath and listening. The only sounds were the storm and the hissing radiator and the frantic, wild drumming of my own heart. Then, a new sound. It was soft, unassuming, almost lost beneath the noise of the rain. Knock, knock, knock. It came from the front door, a polite, gentle tapping, patient, waiting. My whole body froze. Time seemed to stop. I stood rooted to the spot, a statue of a man in a ruined apartment, with broken glass at his feet and ice in his veins, staring at the door that my own voice, from somewhere in the future, had just begged me not to open. My whole body froze. Time seemed to stop. I stood rooted to the spot, a statue with bits of broken glass around its feet, my blood turning to slush in my veins. The knocking. It was real. It wasn't in my head. It was Wood and Knuckles, right there on the other side of my door. Knock, knock, knock. So polite. So normal. That was the worst part. It was the kind of knock you'd hear in the middle of the day. A neighbor asking for sugar. A delivery guy with a package. It had no place here, in the dead of a stormy night, seconds after my own voice had screamed a warning through the phone. My back was ramrod straight. I forgot how to breathe. Every muscle in my body pulled tight, ready to either fight or shatter into a million pieces. My eyes were fixed on the door, on the small brass peephole that shone like a serrure, malevolent, unblinking eye in the yellow light. Don't open the door. The words weren't an echo anymore. They were a commandment carved into my brain. I swallowed hard, a dry click in my throat. My mind, the logical part of it that arranged numbers into neat columns all day, was screaming at me. It's a coincidence. A perfectly timed, statistically impossible coincidence. Someone forgot their key. Someone's car broke down. There are 1,000 rational explanations, but the fear wouldn't listen. It was a physical thing, a cold, heavy presence living in my gut. It knew better. The knocking came again. This time it wasn't polite. It was 3 hard, sharp raps. The sound vibrated through the floorboards, a solid thump, thump, thump that felt like it was hammering directly on my sternum. It was insistent, urgent, no longer asking for entry but demanding it. My breath hitched. I took a half step back, my bare foot landing in the puddle of beer and foam. The cold shock of it shot up my leg, but I barely registered it. All of my focus, all of my existence, was narrowed down to that 3-inch thick piece of wood and the thing on the other side of it. Who is it? What do they want? My head was spinning with a series of questions that had no answers. My friends knew better than to just show up. My family was 100 miles away. Nobody comes here. Thump. P. P. Louder still. A fist now. A heavy, meaty sound. Whoever was out there was putting their shoulder into it. The door rattled in its frame. The old wood groaned in protest. My heart was pounding, a frantic, wild drumming in my own chest that was trying to compete with the assault on the door. I could hear the blood roaring in my ears. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes, trying to force the panic down, trying to think. Call the cops? What would I say? There's a man knocking on my door, and I know this sounds crazy, but I just called myself from the future and told myself not to open it. They'd send a wellness check, maybe a padded wagon. I'd be the crazy guy in 4B. The pounding became a frantic, desperate battery. It was no longer a rhythm, just a chaotic storm of blows against the wood. It sounded like someone trying to claw their way in, to break the world down to get to me. The sheer violence of it was stunning. My mind went blank. This wasn't a neighbor. This wasn't a delivery. This was something else entirely. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was a physical blow. It rushed in, heavier and more terrifying than the noise it replaced. The absence of the pounding was a presence in itself. I was holding my breath, my lungs burning, listening. The only sounds left were the steady hiss of the radiator and the lash of the rain against the glass. I didn't move. I counted the seconds in my head, each one stretching for an eternity. 10 seconds. 20. A full minute. Nothing. No footsteps receding down the hall. No, disgruntled muttering. Just the storm and the old building's groans. It was as if whoever, or whatever, had been out there had simply vanished, evaporated into the rain-soaked night. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I finally let out the breath I was holding in a long, shuddering sigh that fogged the air in front of me. I remained frozen in place, my eyes still locked on the door. It looked the same, solid, secure. But it felt different, violated. The boundary between my small, safe box and the world outside had been tested, and I had no idea what was on the other side. I stood there for what felt like an hour, my nerves screaming, every creak of the building sending a jolt through my system. I was a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. Then my phone buzzed on the counter. The sound made me jump so hard I almost screamed. A raw, guttural noise caught in my throat. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. The screen was lit up again. Unknown number. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely control it as I reached for the phone. My thumb slipped twice on the screen before I managed to swipe to answer. I didn't say hello. I just pressed the cold plastic and glass to my ear, listening. Static. The same digital hiss. Then the breathing. It was still ragged, still wet, but it wasn't a scream. It was a series of long, shuddering breaths. The sound of relief. Thank God, my own voice whispered from the speaker. It was weak, trembling, but the raw edge of terror had softened just a fraction. Oh, thank God. You didn't open it. Who is this? I managed to choke out, my voice a dry rasp. What the hell is going on? No time, the voice snapped, the panic flaring up again. There's no time. Just listen. You did good. You did the right thing. But it's not over. I leaned against the counter, my legs feeling like they might give out. What's not over? Who was at the door? Don't ask questions. Just listen to me. My voice pleaded. It was a surreal, out-of-body experience. I was having a conversation with my own terror. Okay, now the window. The alley window. Are you listening to me? The window? I glanced over at the single large window in the living area, the one that looked out into the blackness of the alley. The rain was a gray, moving curtain against the dark pane. Yes, the window, the voice said, exasperated, terrified. Whatever you do, Jack, do not look out the alley window. Not for any reason. Not if you hear a noise. Not if you see a light. Don't even get close to it. Stay away from the glass. You have to promise me. For the next 10 minutes, that window doesn't exist. Got it? The line clicked dead before I could answer. I lowered the phone, staring at it. My brain felt like it was splitting in two. One half, the logical half, was telling me this was insane. A prank of unbelievable cruelty and technical sophistication. Someone was messing with me. They had to be. They were watching me somehow. Listening. They knew I was alone. They knew the layout of my apartment. But the other half of my brain, the ancient animal part, didn't care about logic. It was screaming. It recognized the genuine, unscripted terror in my own voice. It felt the truth of the warning in my bones. Don't look out the window. I pushed myself off the counter and started to pace. My small apartment had never felt so constricting. It was a cage. I walked from the kitchen area to the small space in front of the couch, then back again. My footsteps were loud on the creaking boards. I avoided the broken glass. I kept my back to the window. Every time I turned, my eyes would flick towards it, a dark, rain-streaked rectangle at the edge of my vision. A powerful, self-destructive urge rose in me. Just look. Just one quick peek. Prove the voice wrong. Prove this is all a joke. But I couldn't. The fear was a physical barrier, pushing me away. My eyes scanned the room, the peeling paint, the water stain on the ceiling, the stack of unopened mail. Everything was familiar, but nothing felt safe. The apartment was no longer my sanctuary. It was the playing field for whatever sick game this was. A cold dread seeped into me, deeper than before. The first call, the knocking. That was a threat from the outside. Something trying to get in. This was different. The warning about the window implied the threat was already out there, circling, peering in. That's when I heard the new sound. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible beneath the radiator's hiss and the drumming rain. A soft, dry sound. Scritch. I stopped pacing. I held my breath, tilting my head, listening. Was that the building settling? Old pipes? Scritch. 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 There it was again. It was coming from the wall that separated my living room from the hallway. It was a light scraping sound, the sound of a fingernail being dragged slowly across drywall. My blood froze. It couldn't be rats. I'd had rats once. They scurried, they squeaked. This was not that. This was slow, deliberate, methodical. I took a cautious step towards the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was trying not to make a sound, as if the thing in the wall could hear me. I pressed my ear against the cool painted surface. Silence. The moment my ear made contact, the sound stopped. I waited. Nothing. I pulled my head back, a fresh wave of confusion and fear washing over me. Did I imagine it? Was my mind, frayed by the calls and the knocking, starting to invent things? I took a step back towards the kitchen. Scritch, scritch! It started again, but it wasn't coming from the same spot. It was coming from the wall next to the kitchen counter now. It had moved. It was following me. This is impossible. The thought was a useless mantra. My logical mind was failing, short-circuiting against a reality that refused to follow the rules. There is nothing in the walls. The walls are solid. It's the pipes. It's the wind. It's anything but a sound that moves. I walked slowly towards my small bedroom, my eyes wide in the dim light. As I passed the stretch of wall by the closet, the sound followed me. A dry, rasping scrape, keeping pace with my footsteps from the other side of the plaster. It was my silent, unseen companion. My throat was so dry it felt like I'd swallowed sand. I reached my bedroom doorway and stopped, listening. The scratching was now coming from inside my bedroom wall, right next to the bed. A sob escaped my lips, a pathetic, choked sound. I stumbled back out into the living room, my back pressing against the far wall, the one with the window. A jolt of panic shot through me as I realized where I was. I flung myself away from it as if the glass were red hot, ending up near the center of the room, panting. My gaze fell to the phone, still sitting on the counter. It was my only connection to whatever this was. My only source of information, twisted and terrifying as it was. It was also a black, reflective rectangle. I stared at it, my chest rising and falling in ragged spurts. The screen was dark, a mirror of polished obsidian. It reflected the jaundiced yellow light from the ceiling fixture, the corner of the couch, a patch of peeling paint on the wall behind me, and a shape. My heart stopped. Not skipped a beat. It just stopped. In the dark reflection of the phone screen, there was a figure, standing right behind me. It was just a silhouette. A tall, thin blot of wrongness standing in the middle of my locked apartment. It was utterly still. It had no face, no features, just a man-shaped hole in the reflection of my living room. My mind went completely, utterly blank. The scratching, the phone calls, the knocking, it all collapsed into this single, impossible moment. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was stare at that dark screen, at my own pale, horrified face, and at the shadow of the thing that was standing less than 5 feet behind me. With a surge of pure, primal adrenaline that felt like electricity flooding my veins, I spun around. There was absolutely no one there. Just the empty space of my small living room, the couch, the chair with my damp coat thrown over it, the wall, the faint sour smell of old takeout. I was alone. I was completely, utterly alone in the room. But I had seen it. I knew I had. My eyes darted around the apartment, searching every corner, every shadow. Nothing. There was nowhere to hide. I looked back at the phone. The screen was still dark, reflecting only me, my face a mask of terror, alone in the empty yellow light. My lungs burned. My brain screamed. I was staring at a patch of air where a man-shaped shadow had been standing less than a second ago. My gaze flickered from the couch to the coat rack to the dark corner by the radiator. Nothing. There was absolutely no one. I was alone. The world tilted on its axis. My mind went blank. The logic that had been my anchor was gone, swept away by an impossible vision in a dark reflection. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. My back hit the wall. I didn't flinch away this time. I needed its solidness. I needed something real to press against. This is impossible. The thought was a weak whisper in a hurricane of terror. My eyes darted back to the phone on the counter. It was just a phone. A piece of black glass and plastic. It couldn't show things that weren't there. It couldn't. Could it be? A hallucination? Stress? I worked a soul-crushing job. I didn't sleep enough. Maybe my brain had finally snapped a gear. Maybe the first phone call, the voice, had been a trigger, a key turning in a lock I never knew existed, opening a door to madness. That had to be it. It was the only explanation that didn't shatter the laws of physics. I pushed myself off the wall, my legs trembling. I had to get a grip. I had to breathe. I walked the 3 steps to the kitchen counter, my hand shaking as I reached for the phone. I needed to turn it off. I needed to throw it against the wall. I needed it to stop. But I also needed it. It was my only connection to the source of this nightmare. What the hell is going on? My head was spinning with a series of questions, each one more frantic than the last. Who is behind all this? As my fingers brushed the cool glass, the phone buzzed, vibrating violently against the countertop. It lit up the dim room with its stark, white light. Unknown number. A raw, animal sound escaped my throat. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. It buzzed again, insistent. A summons. I stared at it, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a rhythm that said run, hide, get out. But where could I go? The door was a place of menace. The window was a forbidden zone. My apartment, my fortress, had shrunk to this tiny circle of floorboards, and the walls were listening. The walls were scratching. Swallowing the metallic taste of fear, I lunged forward and grabbed the phone. My thumb slid across the screen, accepting the call. I didn't put it to my ear this time. I mashed the speakerphone button, dropping the device on the counter as if it were a live grenade. Static exploded into the room, a harsh, digital shriek. Then, the voice. My voice. But it was different now. The relief from the last call was gone, replaced by a new, higher pitch of panic. It was a thin, ragged wire of sound, stretched to its breaking point. No, he saw you! He saw you! The voice shrieked, laced with sobs. I saw him see you! Who saw me? I yelled at the phone, my own voice cracking. There's no one here! The reflection! The fucking reflection! The voice screamed back, a torrent of terrified words. It's how it looks! It's how it sees! The mirror! Jack, are you listening to me? The bathroom mirror! My... Blood froze. The mirror. I thought of the polished glass in the bathroom, the medicine cabinet I stared into every morning while I brushed my teeth. A simple, ordinary object. What about the mirror? My throat was dry. It's a window for it. It's looking through. Right now. It can see you right now. You have to break it. You have to break the goddamn mirror. What? The word came out as a strangled gasp. You want me to smash my mirror? Are you insane? This was it. This was the proof. It was a prank. A sick, elaborate game to make me destroy my own apartment, to make me look like a lunatic. There's no time for this! The voice on the phone shrieked, the sound distorting through the small speaker. It's coming. It's coming for you because it saw you. Smash the mirror. Do it now. No, I yelled, backing away from the counter. No, this is crazy. This is some kind of sick joke. Scritch. The sound was back. It came from the wall that my bathroom shared. Scritch. Screech! It was louder now, sharper. It wasn't the sound of a fingernail anymore. It was the sound of dozens of them, hundreds. A frantic, desperate clawing from inside the wall, right behind where the medicine cabinet would be. It sounded like a nest of animals, trapped and trying to chew their way out. You hear that, don't you? The voice on the phone gasped, a wet, knowing sound. That's it! That's it getting ready! It's coming through the glass! Go! Go now! My mind fractured. The logical part of me was screaming that it was a trick. A speaker planted in the walls. Coordinated. A high-tech haunting. But the ancient part of my brain, the part that had just seen a man-shaped hole in reality, didn't care about explanations. It only heard the frantic clawing and the terrified command. The two sounds, the voice on the phone and the scratching in the wall, merged into a single, overwhelming siren of alarm. The scratching intensified, becoming a furious, tearing sound. Plaster dust must be snowing down inside the wall. I moved. There was no thought. There was only instinct. A jolt of pure adrenaline propelled me forward. I ripped open the cabinet door under the kitchen sink, my hands scrabbling past drain cleaner and old sponges, searching for the cheap red toolbox I hadn't opened in years. I found it, flicked the plastic latches open, and my fingers closed around the cold, heavy steel of a hammer. It felt foreign in my hand, a tool for building. I was about to use it for demolition. Hammer in one hand, phone still shrieking on the counter behind me, I rushed towards the bathroom. "Hurry! Jack! For the love of God, hurry!" I slammed the bathroom door open so hard it bounced off the wall. The small windowless room was lit by a single bare bulb. The first thing I saw was myself. My reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror. I froze in place. It was me. Pale face, wild eyes wide with terror. My hair was a mess. My t-shirt was wrinkled. In my right hand, I held the hammer, raised slightly. I looked like a madman, a stranger in my own skin. For a split second, I saw what anyone else would see, a man who had lost his mind. Behind me, in the reflection, I could see the open door leading back to the living room, the yellow light, the empty space. Scritch. Rip. Scry-A-P-E. The sound was deafening in the small tiled room. It was coming from right behind my reflection's head, as if the thing in the wall was clawing at the back of the mirror, trying to break through from the other side. The voice on the phone was just a raw scream now, wordless and full of agony. My breath hitched. My muscles tensed. The man in the mirror looked back at me, his expression a perfect match for my own horror. It was him or me. It was that simple. The thing was looking through his eyes. With a guttural roar that ripped from my own throat, I lunged forward. I swung the hammer. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the hammerhead arc through the air. I saw my own reflection rushing to meet it, a mirror image of my violence. I saw the moment of impact. The sound was an explosion, a deafening crack-shink that filled the small space and vibrated up my arm. The mirror didn't just break. It detonated. 1,000 silver shards flew outward, glittering like deadly confetti in the harsh light. A few pieces sliced at my cheek and the back of my hand, sharp, hot stings I barely felt. The face in the mirror vanished, replaced by a spiderweb of cracks on a backing of gray cardboard. I wasn't done. The command was to smash it. I swung again and again, my arm a piston of wild panic. I hammered the remaining pieces of glass, turning the web of cracks into a gaping hole, pulverizing the edges until nothing reflective remained. I was panting, my lungs heaving, driven by a terror so profound it had become a kind of strength. And then it was over. The scratching in the wall stopped. It didn't fade out. It didn't slow down. It just ceased. The instant the last large piece of glass tinkled into the sink, the frantic ripping sound from within the wall was cut off, as if a switch had been flicked. The silence that rushed in was a physical force. It pressed on my eardrums. It was deeper and more complete than any silence I had ever known. The only sounds left were my own ragged, gasping breaths and the faint, almost imperceptible hiss of the radiator from the other room. I stood there, my chest rising and falling. The hammer felt immensely heavy in my hand. I let it drop. It clattered into the sink with a loud, jarring noise that made me jump. My eyes were fixed on the ruined medicine cabinet, the hole I had created. It was just a dark, empty space now, filled with the shadows of the cabinet's interior. A small bottle of aspirin, an old razor. I looked down. The floor and the sink were covered in a glittering carpet of broken glass. A single drop of blood welled up on my knuckle, bright red against my pale skin, and dripped onto a shard. Slowly, like a man waking from a nightmare, I backed out of the bathroom. My legs were unsteady. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck, chilling my skin. I took in the scene. The broken glass, the hammer in the sink, my own wild appearance. My gaze fell on the phone, still lying on the kitchen counter. The screen was black. The call had ended. The shrieking voice of my future self was gone. I stood rooted to the spot in the middle of my living room, surrounded by the evidence of my own frenzy. The world was still. The rain still ticked against the window pane. Nothing had changed, and yet everything was different. I had done it. I had followed an impossible command from an impossible voice. I had taken a hammer and smashed a piece of my own home to fight a monster that clawed from inside the walls. A wave of nausea washed over me. What have I done? Is this a joke? Or am I finally, irretrievably, losing my mind? The silence offered no answers. It just watched me, waiting. My own breathing echoed in the sudden stillness, a harsh, ragged sound that filled the void left by the scratching. I stood in the doorway of the bathroom, my gaze fixed on the destruction. The sink was a glittering bed of jagged glass. The medicine cabinet was a dark, gaping mouth. I had done that. A tool meant for putting up shelves, for fixing things, had become an instrument of panicked demolition. The smell of dust and shattered silvering hung in the air, sharp and metallic. I took a step back, then another. My bare feet crunched on a few stray shards that had skittered across the linoleum. I didn't feel the sting. My body was numb, a buzzing shell wrapped around a core of pure, undiluted fear. The hammer lay in the sink, dull steel against white porcelain. It looked obscene, alien. My eyes scanned the room, my living room, the worn couch, the leaning tower of books on the coffee table, the single window showing only blackness and the slick sheen of rain on brick. It was my space, my home. But it no longer felt like mine. It was a cage, a stage for some terrible play, and I was the only actor. The silence was a presence now. It had weight. It listened. What the hell is going on? The question hammered against the inside of my skull. A high-tech prank? A coordinated assault designed to drive a man mad? Planted speakers in the walls, a hacker spoofing my own number, feeding me a recording of my own voice? It was elaborate. It was insane. But it was more believable than the alternative. The alternative was a man-shaped shadow in a phone screen and a nest of unseen things clawing their way through plaster. My blood froze. The closet. The voice on the phone had mentioned the closet. Stay away from the closet. I hadn't thought about it since. Now, my eyes were drawn to it. A simple white-painted door at the end of the short hallway. It was closed. It was always closed. I kept old coats in there, a broken vacuum cleaner, things I should have thrown out years ago. It was just a closet. But as I stared, the simple white door seemed to darken at the edges. The space around it grew colder. A trick of the light. A product of my overtaxed mind. It had to be. I swallowed, my throat dry and tight. I had to get a grip. I had to ground myself. I walked to the kitchen counter, carefully stepping around the debris from the bathroom. The phone was dark, lifeless. The call had ended the moment the mirror had been destroyed. Coincidence? Or cause and effect? My head was spinning with a series of questions, each more frantic than the last. I reached out, my hand trembling, and picked it up. The glass was cool, solid. It felt like a normal phone again. I almost threw it, almost hurled it against the wall, but I stopped myself. It was the only clue I had, my only link to the source of this madness. I put the phone in my pocket. Having it on my person felt both dangerous and necessary. I needed water. I turned the kitchen faucet and filled a glass, my movements stiff and robotic. The water was cold. I drank it down in 3 long gulps, the chill of it a small, welcome shock to my system. I leaned against the counter, closing my eyes, trying to force my heart to stop pounding its frantic rhythm against my ribs. Breathe, Jack. Just breathe. It's over. The scratching is gone. The voice is gone. You're alone. Knock, 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 I dropped the glass. It didn't shatter, just hit the worn linoleum with a dull, heavy thud and rolled under the table. My whole body froze. It was impossible. Every muscle tensed, my eyes snapped to the front door. The sound was different this time. It wasn't the soft, polite tap from earlier. It wasn't the frantic, angry banging that followed. This was a measured, familiar rhythm. A neighbor's knock. The kind of knock I'd heard 100 times before, but the voice on the phone had been clear. Don't answer the door. No matter what you hear, don't open the door. My back pressed against the kitchen counter. My heart was a drum against my bones. Who was behind all this? Who was that first knock? And who was this? The thought that it could just be a neighbor, someone complaining about the sound of me smashing a mirror with a hammer, was almost a relief. A normal, real-world problem, something I could understand. But the fear was a physical thing, a cold hand gripping my insides. The first knock had been a prelude to terror. What if this was too? Knock, knock, knock. A little louder this time, followed by a voice, a woman's voice, slightly muffled by the thick wood of the door. Jack? Sweetheart? Is everything all right in there? I heard a crash. My mind went blank. I knew that voice. It was Maria. Mrs. Kozlowski from 4B, the elderly Polish woman who lived across the hall, the one who always gave me cookies at Christmas and complained about the landlord in the elevator. She was 70. She was harmless. She was real. A wave of dizziness washed over me. Of course. She heard me smashing the mirror. What else could it be? I had been roaring. I had been hammering. I must have sounded like a maniac. The logic of it was a lifeline. I clung to it. But the warning. Don't open the door. Was the voice talking about this knock? Or the first one? My mind was a battlefield. The rational part of me screamed that I was being a fool, hiding from an old woman. The terrified primal part of me screamed that it was a trap, that the voice knew. Jack? Honey, it's Maria. Just wanted to make sure you're okay. Her voice was laced with what sounded like genuine concern. I had to see. I couldn't just stand here, paralyzed. I needed to know what was on the other side of that door. Moving cautiously, trying not to make a sound, I pushed off the counter. I took one step, then another, my body low, like a soldier moving through enemy territory. I reached the door. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. I reached up, my finger trembling, and put my eye to the peephole. The fisheye lens distorted the hallway, but it was her. Maria. Her white hair a halo under the dim hall light, her floral housecoat pulled tight. She was holding a small, empty coffee mug. She looked worried, her brow furrowed. It was just Maria. The relief was so intense it almost buckled my knees. A laugh, sharp and hysterical, almost escaped my lips. A prank. It was all a goddamn prank, and I had fallen for it completely. I had destroyed my own bathroom because of a voice on the phone, and now my sweet old neighbor was checking on me. I was the idiot. I was the crazy one. I fumbled with the locks, my fingers clumsy with the sudden release of tension. I slid the deadbolt back. The sound was loud in the apartment. I unhooked the chain. I turned the knob and pulled the door inward, but only a few inches. A sliver of caution I couldn't quite shake. "Maria," I said, my voice a rough croak. "Hi. I'm so sorry. Did I wake you?" "Oh no, sweetheart, not at all," she said, her face breaking into a wide, crinkling smile. The smile seemed too big. It stretched her lips thin over her gums. "I was just watching my programs and I heard such a terrible bang. I thought maybe a shelf fell." She held up the empty mug. "And I was just about to make some tea, but it seems I'm all out of sugar. You wouldn't have a cup to spare, would you?" It was so normal, so utterly, blessedly mundane. Asking for sugar. It was the most normal thing in the world. "Yeah, of course," I said, my own smile feeling weak and brittle on my face. "Sure. Hang on 1 second." I started to turn back toward the kitchen, but she didn't move. I stopped. She was still standing there, smiling that wide, fixed smile. But her eyes weren't looking at me anymore. They had drifted past my head into the apartment behind me. Her focus was sharp, intense. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. "Maria?" I asked. She didn't answer. Her gaze was locked on something over my shoulder. I felt an irresistible urge to turn, to see what she was seeing. I glanced back. It was the hallway, the wall, the closed door to the closet. There was nothing there, just a door. I turned back to her. "What is it? What are you looking at?" Her smile didn't falter, but it seemed to glaze over. It didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were wide, fixed on that point in my apartment. Her friendly demeanor was a mask, and it was slipping. She was gripping the empty coffee mug so tightly that her knuckles were bone white, the ceramic looking fragile in her grasp. "You have a lovely home, Jack," she said, her voice a little too sweet, a little too loud. "So cozy. You keep it very tidy." Her words didn't match her expression. Her expression was one of rapt, unnerving attention. It was the look of someone watching a television screen, completely absorbed in the program. But the screen was my apartment, and there was nothing to see. "Are you expecting company?" she asked, her eyes still locked on the closet. The question hit me like a splash of ice water. "What? No. Why?" Her gaze finally flicked back to mine. For a second, the smile vanished, and I saw something in her eyes. It wasn't concern. It wasn't neighborly kindness. It was a deep, profound fear, identical to the one I felt churning in my own gut. Then, just as quickly, the smile snapped back into place, a grotesque caricature of friendliness. "No reason," she chirped. The sugar was forgotten. The mug in her hand seemed like a prop she didn't know what to do with. She started to back away from the door, her movements jerky. "Well, I should let you get back to it. Don't want to be a bother." She turned. As she did, she leaned in close to the opening, her face just inches from mine. The smell of mothballs and stale lavender filled my nostrils. She whispered, her voice a dry, rasping hiss that was nothing like her normal friendly tone. "You should lock your door, sweetheart." Her eyes darted back to the closet one last time. "Tightly." Then, under her breath, so low I barely caught it, she murmured something else. A string of syllables in a language I didn't know. It sounded like Zamknij drzwi. She turned and shuffled away down the hallway without another word. I stood rooted to the spot. My hand was still on the doorknob. The air in the hallway seemed to crackle where she had stood. The mundane encounter had twisted into something monstrous. Her stare, her grip on the cup, the whisper, "It's in the vents! Stay away from the closet!" The warnings from the phone slammed back into my consciousness. She had been staring at the closet. She had been looking at it like she could see right through the door. A wave of pure terror, more powerful than anything I had felt before, washed over me. She wasn't a harmless old woman. She was a harbinger. She was a spectator. She saw it. She saw something in my apartment. My breath hitched. The door was still open. The apartment was exposed. I acted on pure, unthinking instinct. I slammed the door shut. Thud. Crack. The sound was sickeningly soft. It wasn't the clean, solid sound of wood hitting the frame. It was dull, wet. It was followed immediately by a sharp, strangled shriek from the other side of the door, a sound of pain, cut off almost as soon as it began. My blood ran cold. Her hand. She must have still had her hand on the door jamb. I had slammed the door on her hand. For a single, horrifying second, I almost wrenched the door open again. To apologize, to help, to see what I'd done. But her whispered warning echoed in my ears. Lock it. Tightly. Her scream hadn't sounded just like pain. It had sounded like surprise. Like a creature that didn't expect its prey to bite back. No. I couldn't open it. The thought was a shield. The fear was a fortress. I hadn't been clumsy. I had been defending myself. The door was a weapon, and I had used it. Ignoring the faint scrabbling sound from the other side, a sound that might have been her trying to pull her crushed fingers free, I threw my weight against the wood. My hands, slick with a cold sweat, fumbled for the locks. Click! The deadbolt slid home, a solid chunk of steel sinking into the frame. Chunk! I pushed the heavy-duty bolt I'd installed myself years ago. It felt final, permanent. The sounds from the hallway stopped. I was alone again, trapped. I pressed my forehead against the cool wood of the door, my chest heaving. I had just maimed an old woman, my neighbor. And the only thing I felt, underneath the roaring panic, was a grim, terrifying sense of security. The walls were silent. The phone in my pocket was still. I had locked the monster out, or I had just locked myself in with it. The silence offered no answers. It just watched me, waiting. My forehead was welded to the wood. The grain of the paint, the tiny imperfections, they pressed into my skin. I could feel the vibrations of the building through the door, the low hum of the city, the distant rumble of the storm. But from the hallway, there was nothing. Not a whimper, not a curse, not the sound of shuffling feet. The scrabbling had stopped. The shriek was a memory branded on the inside of my ears. I had done that. I had slammed a 2-inch thick slab of solid wood on an old woman's hand. I imagined the bones, small and brittle like a bird's, giving way. The crunch. The wetness. My stomach churned, a sour cocktail of bile and adrenaline. But underneath it was something else. A cold, hard certainty. I had followed an order. A whispered warning from the most unlikely source. Lock it. Tightly. She had warned me. Her scream wasn't just pain, it was surprise. The surprise of a spectator who had leaned too close to the stage and been pulled into the play. My back was still pressed against the door, as if my weight alone could keep the world out. My hands, slick with sweat, were braced against the wood. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. I listened. I strained my ears, waiting for the sound of her retreating, or of other doors opening, or of sirens. Nothing. The silence from the hallway was a solid thing, a wall as real as the one I was leaning on. Slowly, I peeled myself away from the door. My shirt was damp. Turning around, my apartment seemed to stretch before me, a landscape of looming shadows and familiar objects turned menacing. The couch was a hulking beast. The standing lamp was a skeletal figure. My own home had become a foreign country, and I didn't speak the language. My eyes snapped to the hallway, to the closet door. Maria's gaze. It hadn't been vacant. It had been directed. She had been staring right at it. "Stay away from the closet." The voice on the phone. "You have a lovely home, Jack." Maria's voice. The two warnings, one screamed in panic and the other chirped in a disturbing sing-song, converged on that single plain white-painted door. What was in there? Old coats? A broken vacuum? Or something else? Something that drew the eyes of a terrified old woman. A low, scraping sound started up again. My head whipped toward the source. It wasn't from the closet. It wasn't from the front door. It was from the wall to my left, the wall that separated my living room from the building's core. It was fainter this time, but more deliberate. Not the frantic clawing of a trapped animal. This was the sound of something exploring, measuring. Scrape. Pause. Scrape, scrape. It was moving, following me. I backed away, putting the coffee table between myself and the wall. My gaze darted around the room, searching for a source, a rational explanation. Rats? The building was old, but this wasn't the skittering of rats. This was heavier, slower. My hand instinctively went to my pocket. The phone was there. A hard rectangle of glass and metal. It felt heavy, dangerous. My lifeline and my curse. As my fingers brushed against it, it vibrated. A violent buzzing shudder that shot up my arm like an electric shock. I almost screamed, ripping my hand away as if I'd been burned. It vibrated again, a long, insistent summons from the depths of my pocket. It wasn't a text. It was a call. "Unknown number." My heart hammered against my ribs. I couldn't answer it. I didn't want to hear that voice again, that ragged, terrified version of myself. But the scratching on the wall grew louder, matching the rhythm of the phone's vibration. Scrape, buzz, scrape, buzz. They were in sync. A horrible, unholy duet. What the hell is going on? My mind screamed the question. This is impossible, I had to answer. Not answering was not an option. Not knowing was worse than knowing. With a trembling hand that felt disconnected from my body, I pulled the phone from my pocket. My thumb shook as it hovered over the green icon. I swiped. I put the phone to my ear. Static. A rushing, hissing sound, like wind through a tunnel. Then, the voice. It was barely recognizable now. The panic from before had been shredded into something raw and guttural. It was a voice worn down to its very foundation, a structure about to collapse. It was me, but a me who had been screaming for hours. "The vents," the voice rasped, each word a struggle, punctuated by a wet, gasping breath. "God! In the vents! Now!" "What?" I whispered, my own voice a dry crackle. What's in the vents? The scratching from the wall stopped. Total silence. It knows! The voice on the phone sobbed. A sound of pure, hopeless agony. It hates the light. The light, keep it on. God! It hates the... The voice cut off, replaced by a sound like a microphone being crushed, and then a high-pitched electronic squeal. The line went dead. I stood frozen in place, the phone still pressed to my ear. In the vents. It hates the light. My eyes shot to the ceiling light, a cheap, dome-shaped fixture. It flickered once, a weak, momentary dip in its yellow glow. My blood froze. It was a response, a reaction. The vents. I looked down. Near the floor, by the hallway, was a metal grate. A heating vent, brown with age and speckled with rust. It was screwed tightly to the wall where the scratching had just been. I acted without thinking. The logic part of my brain had shut down, a non-essential service in a state of emergency. All that was left was the command. All that was left was the fear. I dropped the phone onto the couch and moved toward the kitchen. My movements were stiff, jerky. I fumbled through a drawer, my hands clumsy, scattering forks and spoons. A can opener, a whisk. Useless. I pulled another drawer open, knives. My hand wrapped around the handle of a thick steak knife. The serrated edge gleamed under the flickering kitchen light. It felt heavy, solid. A weapon. A tool. I went back to the vent. I knelt down, the worn floorboards cold against my knees. The grate was held in place by 2 flathead screws, the slots worn and filled with decades of paint. I jammed the tip of the knife into the slot of the first screw. I twisted. The metal of the knife scraped against the metal of the screw with a sound that set my teeth on edge. It wouldn't budge. It was sealed shut with layers of cheap paint and indifference. "Come on," I grunted, putting my weight into it. My knuckles were white. The muscles in my forearm burned. The knife slipped, scratching a long, ugly gash in the wall's paint. I tried again, my breath hissing through my teeth. I had to get it open. The command was absolute. The warning was everything. I twisted harder, a grunt of effort tearing from my throat. My hand was slick with sweat. The knife handle slipped in my grip. Slice. A sharp, hot pain bloomed in the palm of my hand. I looked down. A deep, clean cut ran from the base of my thumb down to my wrist. Blood, shockingly red, welled up instantly, overflowing the wound and dripping onto the floorboards. A single perfect crimson drop. Then another. I barely registered the pain. It was a distant signal from a part of me that no longer mattered. All that mattered was the vent. The sight of my own blood triggered something else. A fury. A desperate, cornered animal rage. I forgot the screw. I jammed the tip of the knife under the edge of the grate and pried. I used the knife as a lever, my injured hand be damned. Metal shrieked in protest. The old wood around the vent splintered. I pulled with everything I had. Crack! The grate flew off, clattering across the floor. It left behind a rectangle of pure, bottomless blackness in the wall. A dark mouth. The moment it opened, the scratching started again, not just from one spot. From everywhere. From inside every wall. It was a chorus of claws on plaster, a dry, frantic sound that surrounded me, magnified by the new opening at my feet. It was deafening. It was a sound that wanted to tear its way out. I stared into the dark opening, my heart pounding a frantic, crushing rhythm against my ribs. The air that puffed out felt cold. It smelled of dust and decay and something else. Something metallic and sweet. The smell of old blood. The light in the living room flickered again. Violently this time. It buzzed, a sound like a giant dying insect. On, off, on, off. The room strobed, the shadows of the furniture jumping and contracting like living things. It hates the light. I was on my hands and knees, staring into that black void as the world flashed around me. The scratching reached a fever pitch. It was right there, just beyond the opening. I could almost feel the vibrations of it through the floor. I leaned closer, knife still clutched in my bleeding hand, my eyes trying to pierce the darkness. I saw nothing. Just an endless, impenetrable black. The main light fixture gave a final, explosive pop. The filament died with a flash of white-hot light, and then darkness. Complete. Utter. A blackness so profound it felt like a physical weight. The scratching stopped. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was more terrifying than the noise had ever been. It was a heavy, listening silence, the kind of silence that has a shape, the kind of silence that knows you're there. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was alone in the pitch black, kneeling on the floor. The only sensations left to me were the cool wood under my knees, the sticky warmth of blood trickling down my fingers, and the solid, cold weight of the knife in my hand. He hadn't just warned me. He had told me its weakness. And now, that weakness was gone. It didn't need to scratch anymore. The light was out. The darkness was not an absence of light. It was a presence. It pressed in from all sides, thick and heavy in my lungs. I could taste the dust in it. I could feel the age of it. The silence was its voice. It was a Mausa, waiting silence, a patient predator. My knees ached on the floorboards. My hand throbbed. I could feel the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of my own blood hitting the wood next to my leg. Each drop was a drumbeat in the vast, listening void. The smell from the vent was stronger now, a sickly sweet odor of rot and cold earth, coiling in the air around me. It was here. Whatever it was, the darkness had let it in. The scratching was gone because it no longer needed to scratch. It was free. A tremor started in my gut and radiated outward. My whole body shakes uncontrollably. I had to move. I couldn't stay here, kneeling before this dark altar I had just opened. I was a target. My mind went blank. The only thought was door. The front door. The boundary between my space and the world. It wasn't enough to have it locked. It had to be sealed. I pushed myself up. Pain shot through my cut palm as I flattened it against the floor for balance. It was a slick, wet pressure. I bit back a cry, the sound dying in my dry throat. Moving cautiously, trying not to make a sound, I extended my good hand into the blackness in front of me. My fingers brushed against the rough fabric of the couch. Thank God. An anchor. I used it to pull myself to my feet, my legs unsteady. I shuffled sideways, one hand trailing along the back of the couch, the other holding the steak knife out in front of me like a blind man's cane. The air was so thick that breathing was difficult. My heart was pounding, a frantic prisoner against my ribs. My shin collided with the coffee table, a jolt of pain, sharp and sudden. I grunted, stumbling forward, my free hand flailing. My fingers found the wall, the cool, flat surface of the paint. I followed it, my breath held tight in my chest. Each step was a guess. The layout of my own home, a map I knew by heart, was gone, erased by the black. My hand found the edge of the door frame, then the doorknob. Cold metal. I tested it. Locked. Still locked. It wasn't enough. You should lock your door. Tightly. Maria's voice, a ghost in my memory. She wasn't warning me about a burglar. She was warning me about this. My eyes scanned the room, a useless reflex in the gloom. I knew what I needed. The heavy wooden dining chair. The one my grandpa gave me. Solid oak. Heavy as a tombstone. It sat against the far wall. Without a moment's hesitation, I let go of the door and plunged back into the center of the room. I moved faster now, propelled by a pure animal panic. My foot snagged on the rug and I pitched forward, catching myself on my knees. The impact jarred my teeth. The knife clattered to the floor somewhere in the darkness to my left. I left it. It was no use against this. I scrambled forward on my hands and knees, a desperate crawl through an unseen landscape. My fingers brushed against a leg, a chair leg. I found it. I gripped it with both hands, my injured palm screaming in protest, and pushed myself up. I dragged the chair backward, its legs groaning against the floorboards. The sound was monstrous in the silence. It was a declaration. I am here. I am fighting back. When I felt the back of my legs hit the front door, I stopped. I turned, wrestling with the chair's dead weight. It was awkward, heavy. I got it turned sideways, wedging the top of its backrest under the doorknob. It wasn't enough. It needed to be a brace, a wall. With a roar that ripped from my throat, a sound of fury and terror, I threw my entire body weight into the chair. I shoved it against the door. Crack! The sound of splintering wood echoed in the small space. The doorframe. I had splintered my own doorframe. A jolt of savage satisfaction shot through me. Let it try to get through that. Panting, my back pressed against the wall next to the now barricaded door, I slid down to the floor. My body shuddered with the aftermath of adrenaline. Cold sweat breaks out on the back of my neck. My head was spinning with a series of questions. What was happening? Who was doing this? What was in my apartment with me? The phone. I needed help. Real help. Not from a voice that sounded like my own dying echo. My cell phone. I had dropped it on the couch when I ran for the knife. I pushed myself to my feet again. The map of the room was clearer now, etched by my painful journey. I found the couch. I patted the cushions, my hands frantic. My fingers brushed against the smooth, cool glass. I clutched it. The screen came to life, a blinding rectangle of light in the oppressive dark. I squinted, my pupils contracting painfully. The light cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe in the corners of the room. I felt exposed, naked in that small spotlight. I quickly dimmed the screen to its lowest setting. My thumb shook as I navigated to the keypad. 911. I pressed call. I held the phone to my ear, my entire body tense. 1 ring. 2. 911, what's your emergency? The voice was a woman's, calm, professional. It sounded like it was coming from another planet, a sane planet. I had to force the words out. They came out as a ragged whisper. I need help. Sir, I can barely hear you. Can you speak up? What is the address of the emergency? I swallowed, my throat raw. 2442 North Clark, apartment 4B. I whispered the A formation, my eyes darting into the shadows my own phone was creating. There's someone in my apartment. Someone is in your apartment right now? Her voice was still calm, but there was a new edge to it. Yes. No. I don't know. How could I explain this? The lights went out. I heard sounds. In the walls. I think they're still here. I was babbling. I sounded insane. Okay, sir. Can you describe the intruder? No, it's dark. I can't see anything. My own words terrified me. Please, just send someone. A unit is on its way, sir. Can you stay on the line with me? Are you in a safe location? I'm by the front door. I've barricaded it. Good. Just stay there. Help is on the way. Her calm was a lifeline. I held on to it. Maybe this was all it was. A break-in. A very, very strange break-in. The calls were a prank. A sick, elaborate prank to terrorize me before. My mind refused to finish the thought. Sir? Sir, are you still there? Yes, I breathed. I'm here. We stayed like that for a count of 10 heartbeats. Her, silent on the other end. Me, listening to the pounding in my own ears, my eyes scanning the darkness beyond the small halo of my phone. The silence in the apartment was still there, heavy, watchful. Then, a new sound began. A sound that made my blood freeze. A sound that had no right to exist. A shrill, electronic ringing. Ring. Ring. It wasn't coming from my cell phone. It was coming from across the room, from the small desk in the corner. Sir, what is that noise? The dispatcher asked, her voice suddenly sharp. Is that a phone ringing? I couldn't answer. Time seemed to stop. I knew that ring. It was a ghost from a decade ago. It was the ring of the old landline phone. The beige plastic one with the coiled cord, the one I kept for nostalgia's sake. The one I had unplugged from the wall jack 6 months ago because it was useless. The cord was tucked up underneath it, gathering dust. This is impossible. Ring. Ring. The piercing sound sliced through the darkness, an undeniable physical fact that defied all logic. Sir, what is that phone ringing? The dispatcher's voice insisted, tinny and distant in my ear. I pulled the cell phone away from my face and stabbed the end call icon. I couldn't explain it to her. She was part of a world that no longer applied to this room, the world of rules and logic and electricity. I was in a new place now, and in this place, dead things could sing. I stood rooted to the spot, my entire body trembling. It was a summons, a demand. The sound was an obscenity in the silent dark. It had to be answered. Not answering was letting it win. Not knowing was worse than the terror of knowing. I began to walk toward the sound, step by step. I didn't need the light from my phone. The ringing was a beacon, guiding me through the black. My bare feet felt the cold wood. The air grew colder as I approached the corner. My hand found the desk. I slid it across the dusty surface, past a stack of old mail, a cup full of pens. My fingers brushed against cool, smooth plastic. The receiver. Ring. It vibrated under my touch, a phantom current of electricity coursing through the dead plastic. Swallowing saliva, I curled my fingers around the receiver. It felt heavier than I remembered. I lifted it from its cradle. The ringing stopped. I brought the receiver to my ear. The line was not dead. There was no dial tone. There was only a faint, airy static. The sound of a vast, empty space. And under it, a sound I now knew better than my own name. A wet, ragged, hitching breath. A desperate gasp for air from lungs that were failing. It was my breath. It was the voice on the phone. It was me. My breath hitched in my throat. I was listening to my own ghost. The sound was thin, reedy, coming through a tunnel of static. It was the sound of a man drowning on dry land. The sound of me. My fingers, slick with a mixture of sweat and blood, spasmed. The plastic receiver slipped. It fell from my grasp, hitting my bare foot with a dull thud before clattering onto the floorboards. The fall did not disconnect the call. The sound continued, now tinny and distant, spilling from the earpiece into the dark room. A constant, wet, gasping. I scrambled backward, away from the desk, away from that sound. My good hand crab-walked over the floor, my legs pushing me until my back hit the rough plaster of the opposite wall. I pulled my knees to my chest. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. What the hell is going on? This is impossible. The phone was dead. It had no power. It had no connection. And yet, I had heard it. I was still hearing it. The gasping stopped. Silence rushed back in to fill the void, heavier than before. My ears strained, trying to catch any hint of movement. There was nothing. Just the low hum of my own blood pulsing in my ears. Then, a new voice came from the receiver on the floor. It was my voice, crystal clear, no static, no panic. It was calm, measured. It was the voice I used for work presentations. "He is sitting on the floor," it said. "His back is against the wall. He is afraid." My blood froze. I couldn't believe my ears. I stopped breathing. Time seemed to stop. I stayed perfectly still, a statue carved from fear, my eyes locked on the faint, dark shape of the receiver across the room. "He is holding his breath," the voice continued, a simple statement of fact. "He is trying to understand. He cannot." I let out my breath in a ragged, involuntary gasp. "He just exhaled," the voice reported, without pause, without emotion. A narrator for my own private hell. A tremor started in my hands. This was a different level of terror. The frantic warnings from my future self were one thing. That was a dialogue, a desperate attempt to help. This was an observation, a clinical assessment. I was a rat in a maze, and something was taking notes. Who is behind all this? I had to be sure. I had to test it. My mind, what was left of it, screamed for a piece of data it could analyze, a variable I could control. I mouthed a word, pushing no air from my lungs, just forming the shape with my lips. "Why?" The voice from the floor spoke instantly. He just mouthed the word, "why?" A wave of nausea washed over me. I clamped my hand over my mouth, stifling a surge of bile. It knew. It saw. In the total darkness, from a piece of dead plastic, it saw me. It knew my thoughts before they even became sound. I felt exposed, peeled open, my very thoughts laid bare on a slab. My eyes scanned the room, darting from one pool of black to another. I was looking for a camera, a microphone, anything. A rational explanation. There was none. My apartment wasn't smart. I didn't own an Alexa or a Google Home. There was only the old radiator, the drafty window, the thin walls. And now, the voice. "He is looking for a camera," it stated calmly. "There is no camera." I squeezed my eyes shut. This couldn't be happening. It was a dream. A hallucination brought on by stress and fear. I had to be asleep. Bam! 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 My eyes shot open. The sound was not in my head. It was real. It was physical. It was 3 thunderous blows against my front door, so hard the whole wall shuddered. The chair I'd wedged under the knob rattled in protest. "Chicago Police Department!" A man's voice bellowed from the hallway. "Open the door!" Help. My 911 call. They were here. A tidal wave of relief so powerful it almost brought me to my knees crashed through me. It was real. A real-world problem. A break-in. Cops. Something I could understand. The voice, the phone, the scratching. All of it could be explained later. Right now, safety was on the other side of that door. "Sir, this is Officer Kowski. We got a 911 call about an intruder. Are you all right in there?" Kowski. A real name. A tangible detail. I'm here," I shouted, my voice cracking. I started to get up, my legs trembling. From the floor, the voice from the landline receiver spoke again, low and even. "He thinks help has arrived. He is moving toward the door." I froze. A shiver runs down the spine. The 2 realities were colliding. The cop on one side of the door, the cold narrator on the other. "Sir, open the door!" the officer yelled again, his voice edged with impatience. "We need to clear the apartment." I took a step, then another. I was moving cautiously, trying to make no sound, my bare feet cold against the wood. My mind was spinning with a series of questions. The relief was souring. How did they get into the building so fast? The front security door was always locked. Did the dispatcher give them a code? Did they buzz every apartment? "He is hesitating," the narrator's voice observed from the floor. "He is 20 feet from the door. Now 15. He is remembering the warnings." "Don't answer the door. No matter what you hear, don't open the door." The first call. The first warning from myself. My panicked, screaming self. Was this what he was warning me about? A cop? It made no sense. It was an utter absurdity. "Sir, I'm not going to ask you again. Open this door or we will be forced to break it down." Kowski's voice was hard now. Official. A threat. I had to know. I had to see. Logic was failing me. Instinct was screaming at me from 2 different directions. Seeing was the only thing left. I reached the door, my back pressed against the wall beside it. My heart was pounding, a frantic trapped bird. I leaned sideways, my fingers searching for the small, cool brass cover of the peephole. "He is reaching for the peephole," the narrator said. There was a new quality to its voice. Not emotion. Something else. An inflection. Like a scientist watching a critical moment in an experiment. "He's going to look." I flicked the cover open. The metallic click was deafening in the charged air. I put my eye to the lens. The hallway was lit. A dim, yellow, buzzing light from the overhead fixture. The fisheye lens warped the patterned wallpaper, making it curve and swirl. For a second, that was all I saw. An empty hallway. My heart skipped a beat. Maybe they were standing to the side. Maybe. Then, a face rushed into the frame. It filled the entire peephole, distorted and monstrously close. My soul flew away. I tried to scream, but my throat closed. No air could get in or out. It was my face. My own face. But it was wrong. Horribly, terribly wrong. The eyes were wide, lidless, perfectly round like a doll's eyes, staring directly into mine. They held no recognition, only a vast, hungry intensity. The skin was pale and stretched too tightly over the bones. And the mouth? The mouth was curled into a silent, screaming grin that stretched from ear to ear, pulling the corners of the lips into grotesque, unnatural peaks. It was a mask of my face, worn by something that didn't understand how faces were supposed to work. I fell backward, scrambling away from the door, a choked animal sound tearing from my throat. I crashed into the barricaded chair, sending a jolt of pain through the splintered frame and up my spine. I landed hard on the floor, my head hitting the wood. Stars exploded behind my eyes. I didn't care. I pushed myself further away, crab walking backward, my eyes fixed on the door, on the peephole, that tiny black circle that had just shown me the face of madness. There was no sound from the hallway. The face was gone. Had it ever been there? Was I losing my mind? The voice from the floor spoke into the ringing silence in my ears. He saw it. Yes, I saw it. My body started to shake uncontrollably. Every muscle tensed, coiled like a spring. Cold sweat breaks out on the back of my neck. I was trapped. The thing I was supposed to be keeping out. It was already wearing my face. A new sound, a soft scraping from the other side of the door, the sound of a shoe shifting on the welcome mat. It was still there. Then the voice came again from the hallway. It was not the bellowing shout from before. It was calm, measured, almost gentle. The voice of Officer Kowski. "Sir," it said, the sound muffled by the thick wood of the door. "We've had reports of a disturbance." I said nothing. I could barely breathe. I pressed myself further into the wall, trying to make myself smaller. "I know you're in there, son," the voice continued, smooth as oil. The word son made my skin crawl. It felt possessive, predatory. "I can hear you breathing. Just open the door. We can make this all go away." Make it all go away. The promise was seductive. It was also the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. I risked a glance down at the bottom of the door. In the thin crack of light from the hallway, I could see a shadow. It was long, impossibly long and thin, stretching far into my apartment. And it was perfectly, unnaturally still. It wasn't the shadow of a man shifting his weight. It was the shadow of something standing at attention, waiting. "There's no need to be afraid, Jack," the voice cooed. It knew my name. My mind went blank. The dispatcher. I'd given her my name. It had to be, but the calm assurance in that voice, the way it spoke my name like an old acquaintance, no. Something was fundamentally broken. "We just want to help you," the voice insisted. "You've had a rough night. We know. We know all about the calls. We know what you've heard." My breath caught. My eyes darted from the door to the landline receiver on the floor. They were connected. The thing in the hall and the voice in the room. They were working together. The warnings, the fear, the frantic calls from myself. They weren't to help me survive. They were part of the process. They were designed to break me down, to herd me, to corner me right here. And the final piece was a friendly, reassuring voice on the other side of a locked door, promising salvation. A voice that wore a policeman's name, just waiting for me to undo the final lock. Waiting for me to let it in. I was staring at the door, at my pathetic barricade, a single wooden chair against that. My gaze was fixed on the doorknob, on the deadbolt above it. I thought of my own hands turning the lock, opening the door, welcoming the thing with my face into my home. I started shaking my head, a slow, rhythmic motion. "No," I whispered to the empty, dark room. "No." The voice on the other side of the door seemed to hear me. It sighed, a sound of theatrical patience. All right, Jack. Have it your way, but we can't wait out here forever. A metallic click echoed from the hallway, soft, precise, then another, and a third. The sound of a key sliding into a lock. My lock. The deadbolt. My blood ran cold. I stood rooted to the spot, listening. A slow, grinding turn. The unmistakable noise of the deadbolt sliding open. From the outside. Cái lê chọt qua kêu một tiếng cạch. Một âm thanh khô khốc, máy móc. Âm thanh của kim loại di chuyển vào vị trí. Âm thanh của sự an toàn cuối cùng của tôi đang bị tháo dỡ từ bên ngoài. Tôi đứng rooted to the spot. Hơi thở mắc kẹt trong lồng ngực. Tôi không thể cử động. Tôi không thể nghĩ. Toàn bộ sự tồn tại của tôi đã thu hẹp lại thành âm thanh đó, và cánh cửa gỗ dày ngăn cách tôi với khuôn mặt mà tôi đã thấy trong lỗ nhìn trộm. Một tiếng cột kẹt chậm rãi, kéo dài theo sau. Khi chốt khóa hoàn toàn được rút lại, tôi đứng đó, chờ đợi tiếng nằm cửa xoáy, chờ đợi cánh cửa mở ra, chờ đợi cái thứ đối lọt cảnh sát với khuôn mặt của tôi và đôi mắt búp bê bước vào bóng tối của căn hộ tôi, nhưng không có gì xảy ra. Sự im lặng kéo dài, nó nặng nề, căng như một sợi dây đàn. Tôi có thể nghe thấy tiếng máu của chính mình gầm gừ trong tai, một nhịp trong điên cuồng trước sự im lặng bên ngoài. Jack! Giọng nói của Kowski lại vang lên, vẫn bình tĩnh đến lạ thường, gần như thờ ơ. Nó không còn cố gắng thuyết phục nữa. Giờ nó giống như một sự tò mò lâm sàng. Cậu vẫn ở đó chứ, con trai? Chợt khóa đã mở, việc chống cự không còn ý nghĩa gì nữa. Hơi thở của tôi thoát ra trong một tiếng rít rung rẩy. Cút đi! Tôi hét lên, giống tôi vỡ tang vì kinh hoàng và mắc nước. Cút đi khỏi đây! My back pressed against the wall, cách xa cánh cửa nhất có thể trong khi vẫn giữ nó trong tầm mắt. Tôi không thể rời mắt khỏi nó, không thể rời mắt khỏi cái bóng dưới khe cửa. Nó vẫn ở đó, dài, gầy và bất đồng một cách đáng sợ. Tôi không thể làm thế, Jack. Giọng nói đáp lại, không hề có chút bực bội nào. Giọng nói của nó giống như một bản ghi âm. Tôi có báo cáo cần hoàn thành. Chúng tôi cần đảm bảo an toàn cho hiện trường. Quy trình là vậy. Quy trình. Cái từ đó làm a shiver runs down the spine. Đây không phải là một người. Người ta có cảm xúc. Người ta tức giận khi bị la mắng. Người ta mất kiên nhẫn. Cái thứ này, nó chỉ đơn giản là đang thực hiện một danh sách kiểm tra. Anh không phải cảnh sát. Tôi gào lên, một phần lời nói của tôi bị tiếng nặc nghẹn lại. Tôi đã thấy anh. Tôi đã thấy mặt anh. Một khoảng lặng. Lần này, sự im lặng có vẻ khác. Nó có một sự cân nhắc. À, giọng nói cuối cùng cũng lên tiếng, và lần đầu tiên có một sự thay đổi nhỏ trong thanh điệu của nó. Một sự thay đổi tinh vi đến mức tôi suýt nữa đã bỏ lỡ nó. Đó là một âm điệu của sự hài lòng. Vậy là cậu đã thấy điều đó thực sự làm mọi thứ đơn giản hơn. My blood froze. Đơn giản hơn? What the hell is going on? My mind was spinning with a series of questions. Mỗi câu hỏi lại đáng sợ hơn câu trước. Vậy cậu đã biết mình không thể trốn thoát. Cái giọng đó tiếp tục, mượt mà như dầu loang trên mặt nước. Cậu chỉ đang trì hoãn điều không thể tránh khỏi. Cánh. Cửa đã mở khóa, Jack. Cậu có thể tự mình mở nó ra, hoặc tôi có thể mở nó. Dù thế nào đi nữa, tôi cũng sẽ vào trong. Nó giống như một lời đề nghị kinh doanh, một sự lựa chọn giữa hai kết quả không thể tưởng tượng được. Tôi nhìn chằm chằm vào cái ghế gỗ xôi nặng nề mà tôi đã chèn dưới tay nắm cửa. Một rào cản mỏng manh, đáng thương. Nó sẽ không giữ được lâu, nhưng nó là tất cả những gì tôi có. Không. Tôi thì thầm, lắc đầu trong bóng tối. Không, anh sẽ không vào đây. Sẽ thôi. Giọng nói khẳng định một cách đơn giản. Rồi tôi nghe thấy nó. Một âm thanh mới. Một tiếng cào nhẹ. Từ phía dưới của cánh cửa. Một tiếng sột soạc ngắn ngủi, giống như móng tay cào lên gỗ. My eyes shot đến cái bóng. Nó đã thay đổi. Nó không còn dài và gầy nữa. Nó đang có lại, rút về phía khe cửa. Như thể người đàn ông, cái thứ đó, đang quỳ xuống. Jack! Giọng nói vang lên, nhưng lần này nó bị bóp nghẹt. Nó thấp hơn, gần sát sàn nhà. Nó đang nói qua khe cửa. Tôi có thể ngửi thấy mùi của cậu từ đây. Mùi sợ hãi. Nó thật nồng. Tôi bịt miệng lại để ngăn một tiếng kêu oẻ lên. Toàn thân tôi run lên, một cơn co giật không thể kiểm soát được. Cold sweat breaks out on the back of my neck. Đây không phải là một cuộc xâm nhập. Đây là một cuộc săn lùng. Tôi là con mối. Tôi không trả lời. Tôi không thể. Tôi chỉ có thể nhìn chằm chằm kinh hoàng vào dải ánh sáng mờ ảo đó và cái bóng đang tụ lại ngay phía bên kia. Một tiếng thở dài, bực bội vang lên từ khe cửa. Một âm thanh rất con người, nhưng phát ra từ cái thứ đó, nó còn đáng sợ hơn cả sự bình tĩnh máy móc trước đó. Sau đó âm thanh của sự di chuyển, tiếng vai sột soạc trên sàn gỗ hành lang, tiếng bước chân, nặng nề, có chú ý, đang đi xa dần. Tôi holding my breath and listening, căng tai hết mức. Một bước, hai bước, ba. Âm thanh nhỏ dần khi nó đi xuống hành lang. Tôi nghe thấy tiếng cốt kết của bậc thang thứ 7 gần cuối hành lang, bậc thang luôn kêu. Sau đó, im lặng. Nó đã đi rồi sao? Could it be? Thật sự đơn giản như vậy sao? Nó đã từ bỏ? Không. It was an utter absurdity. Không đời nào. Đây là một trò lừa. Một cái bẫy. Nó đang đợi tôi thư giãn, đợi tôi tin rằng mình đã an toàn. Tôi đợi. Thời gian kéo dài ra. Mỗi giây là một sự tra tấn. Tôi đem nhịp tim của mình. 1, 2, 3. Lên đến 100. Rồi 200. My muscles tense up. Đau. Nhói vì căng thẳng không dứt. Không có gì. Không có tiếng bước chân quay trở lại. Không có tiếng cào. Không có giọng nói. Từ phía bên kia căn phòng, một âm thanh khác làm tôi giật nảy mình. Một tiếng cạch nhỏ. Đó là chiếc điện thoại bàn, cái máy thu đã rơi xuống sàn. Giọng nói của người kể chuyện đã im lặng. Cuộc gọi đã kết thúc. Tôi có một mình. Cảm giác đó không mang lại sự khuây khỏa. Nó chỉ làm tăng thêm cảm giác bị cô lập. Tôi là một hòn đảo trong một biển im lặng đầy rầy hiểm nguy. Tôi phải di chuyển. Tôi không thể đứng đây mãi mãi. Tôi cần phải xác nhận. Tôi cần phải kiểm tra các ô khóa. Moving cautiously, trying not to make a sound, tôi từ từ đẩy mình ra khỏi bức tường. Chân tôi run rẩy, giống như chân của một con hươu mới sinh. Tôi nhấc chiếc điện thoại di động từ nơi nó đã rơi xuống sàn. Màn hình đã nứt, nhưng nó vẫn hoạt động. Tôi bật đèn pin, chùm sáng yếu ớt, mong manh cắt một đường xuyên qua bóng tối, làm bụi bay lên như những ngôi sao nhỏ. Tôi hướng chùm sáng về phía cánh cửa. Nó vẫn đóng. Cái ghế vẫn ở nguyên vị trí, bị chèn chặt dưới tay nằm cửa. Không có gì có vẻ đã bị xáo trộn. Tôi bước từng bước một như đang đi trên băng mỏng. Sàn nhà kêu cốt kẹt dưới chân trần của tôi, mới âm thanh như một tiếng súng trong căn hộ im ắng. Tôi đến cửa, giữ khoảng cách tôn trọng và chiếu đèn vào các ố khóa. Tay nắm cửa. Chợt khóa. Tim tôi đập thình thịch. Chợt khóa. Cái lấy kim loại nhỏ lẽ ra phải nhô ra khỏi mép cửa, giờ đây đã hoàn toàn thụt vào trong. Nó đã được mở khóa. Từ bên ngoài. This is impossible. Nhưng bằng chứng lại ở ngay trước mặt tôi. Tôi hít một hơi sâu, run rẩy và vươn tay ra. Những ngón tay run rẩy của tôi lướt qua gỗ. Tôi nắm lấy cái lấy nhỏ của chốt khóa và đẩy nó. Nó trượt về vị trí đóng với một tiếng keng chắc chắn, đầy thỏa mãn. Tôi làm lại lần nữa, mơ rồi đóng nó. Nó hoạt động hoàn hảo, nó không bị hỏng. Nó đã mở nó. Bằng cách nào đó, nó đã mở khóa chốt từ phía bên kia. Tôi xoay chọt, sau đó tôi kiểm tra tay nắm cửa. Tôi xoay nó, xác nhận rằng nó vẫn bị khóa. Sau đó tôi đẩy mạnh vào cái ghế, chèn nó chặt hơn nữa. Sẽ không giữ được lâu, nhưng nó là một cái gì đó. Xong việc, tôi lùi lại. Tôi đã làm tất cả những gì có thể với cánh cửa. Nó đã được bảo vệ, tạm thời. Tôi quay lại, dựa lưng vào cánh cửa và quét chùm sáng của điện thoại di động khắp căn phòng. Ánh sáng lướt qua những mảnh vỡ của chiếc gương trong phòng tắm, những mảnh kính lấp lánh như kim cương trong bóng tối. Nó lướt qua chiếc điện thoại bàn im lặng trên sàn. Nó lướt qua những vết cào trên tường nơi tôi đã điên cuồng tìm kiếm nguồn gốc của tiếng ồn. Căn hộ của tôi, nhà của tôi. Giờ đây, nó giống như một hiện trường vụ án, một khu vực thảm họa cá nhân. Tôi cần phải kiểm tra phần còn lại. Cửa sổ, tôi đi qua phòng khách, chùm sáng của tôi nhảy múa trước mắt. Cửa sổ nhìn ra con hẻm, tấm rèm vẫn được kéo kín, đúng như tôi đã để nó sau lời cảnh báo của một trong những cuộc gọi đầu tiên. Đừng nhìn ra ngoài cửa sổ con hẻm. Tôi có nên kiểm tra không? Tôi có nên nhìn không? Sự tò mò là một sự ngứa ngáy trong não tôi, một sự thôi thúc gần như không thể cưỡng lại được. Nhưng nỗi sợ hãi còn mạnh hơn. Tôi để tấm rèm yên. Một số điều tốt nhất là không nên biết. Căn hộ nhỏ, một phòng khách, một nhà bếp nhỏ xíu, một phòng ngủ, một phòng tắm và một hành lang ngắn nối tất cả chúng lại với nhau. Tôi đứng ở lối vào hành lang, chiếu đèn pin xuống, nó chỉ dài khoảng 15 feet. Bức tường bên trái có cửa vào phòng ngủ và phòng tắm của tôi. Bức tường bên phải trống trơn, nó luôn luôn trống trơn. Một khoảng tường thạch cao màu bẻ không có gì đặc biệt, kết thúc ở bức tường phía sau, nơi có một từ quần áo nhỏ. Tôi bắt đầu đi xuống hành lang, quét ánh sáng từ bên này sang bên kia theo một thói quen thần kinh. Sàn nhà ở đây luôn kêu cốt kẹt. Mỗi bước đi là một bản giao hưởng của những tiếng rên rỉ và rên rỉ của gỗ cũ. Cửa phòng ngủ, đóng. Cửa phòng tắm, mộ, để lộ những mảnh gương vỡ bên trong. Tôi tiếp tục đi, chùm sáng của tôi di chuyển về phía trước. Bức tường bên phải, trống trơn. Bức tường phía sau, cửa, tủ quần áo, đóng. Mọi thứ đều đúng như nó phải vậy. Không có Kowski, không có khuôn mặt trong lò nhìn trộm, không có giọng nói trên điện thoại. Có lẽ nó thực sự đã kết thúc. Có lẽ tôi đã tưởng tượng ra fan tồi tệ nhất. Có lẽ đó là một kẻ chơi khăm tàn ác và họ đã chán và bỏ đi. Một tia hy vọng nhỏ bé, mong manh nảy mầm trong lồng ngực tôi. Nó có lẽ là ngu ngốc. Nó có lẽ là nguy hiểm. Nhưng tôi bám vào nó. Tôi đã đến cuối hành. Lặng. Tôi quay lại và nhìn lại con đường mình đã đi. Về phía cánh cửa trước, giờ đã bị che khuất trong bóng tối. Tôi cảm thấy hơi an toàn hơn một chút khi ở đây, cách xa nó. Tôi hít một hơi, rồi thở ra. Sau đó tôi quay lại. Tôi chiếu đèn pin vào bức tường phía sau lần cuối cùng, chỉ để xác nhận, để củng cố mảnh hy vọng nhỏ bé đó. Và rồi, my soul flew away. Nó không còn ở đó nữa. Cái tư quần áo, nó đã biến mất. My mind went blank. Tôi không thể xử lý những gì mặt mình đang thấy. Nó không có ý nghĩa. Nơi mà một giây trước đó là một cánh cửa từ quần áo bằng gỗ trắng rẻ tiền, giờ đây là một cái gì đó khác. Chùm sáng của tôi run rẩy trong tay tôi. Tôi giữ nó yên, buộc bản thân phải nhìn. Ở vị trí của tủ quần áo, giờ có một cánh cửa. Một cánh cửa mới. Một cánh cửa chưa bao giờ ở đó trước đây. Nó không giống bất cứ thứ gì khác trong căn hộ của tôi. Nó không phải màu trắng. Nó không phải bằng gỗ dáng rẻ tiền. Nó được làm bằng một loại gỗ tới màu nào đó, được sơn một màu đen mờ, phẳng lặng, hấp thụ ánh sáng của đèn pin của tôi và không phán chiếu lại gì cả. Không có tay nắm cửa, không có lỗ khóa, chỉ có một bề mặt phẳng đến kít. Và nó đang hé mở, chỉ một chút. Một khe hở không rộng hơn 1 inch, dẫn vào một bóng tối hoàn toàn, tuyệt đối. Một bóng tối dường như còn đen hơn cả bóng tối trong căn hộ của tôi. Nó không phải là sự thiếu ánh sáng, nó cảm thấy như một sự hiện diện, một chất đắc lạnh lẽo. Tranh giai công khe hở đó ri rà. I stood there, paralyzed, the phone shaking so hard the beam of light danced frantically over the impossible object. What is this? What the hell is this? This wasn't a trick. This wasn't a prank. This was... Su Favo, Su Vi Pham. Vát Ly đã ngừng hoạt động. Quy tắc của thực tại đã bị viết lại trong hành lang của riêng tôi. Các cuộc gọi, những lời cảnh báo. Đập vỡ gương, chắn các lỗ thông hơi, đừng mở cửa. Chúng chưa bao giờ là để giữ một thứ gì đó bên ngoài. Chúng là để đảm bảo tôi bị mắc kẹt bên trong. Khi nó ở đây, khi nó đến, tôi lùi lại một bước, rồi một bước nữa, mặt tôi dán chặt vào khe hở đến đó. Tôi không dám rời mắt khỏi nó. Bởi vì trong sâu thẳm tâm trí đang tan vỡ của mình, tôi biết một điều chắc chắn như cái chết. Cái gì đó ở phía bên kia của cánh cửa đó đang nhìn lại. My heel caught the edge of the hallway runner. I stumbled backward, arms windmilling in the dark, the phone's weak beam flailing wildly across the ceiling. I landed hard on my tailbone, a jolt of pain shooting up my spine. The phone skittered away, its light spinning like a dying firefly before coming to rest aimed at the living room wall. I didn't care about the pain. I didn't care about the phone. I scrambled backward on my hands and feet, like a crab, away from the hallway, away from that impossible black door. My eyes were locked on the thin vertical line of absolute nothingness it was leaking into my apartment. A coldness radiated from it, a physical chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. It was the cold of a tomb. The calls, the voice. Seal the vents. Smash the mirror. All of it. A lie. A script. A set of instructions to build my own cage, and I had followed every single word. My back hit the leg of the sofa. I stopped, panting, my chest heaving with ragged, silent breaths. I was in the living room now, maybe 40 feet from the hallway. It felt like a mile. It felt like nowhere near enough. The apartment was still. The oppressive, heavy stillness had returned. The scratching in the walls was gone. The voice of Kowski was gone. There was only the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears, and the distant muted hum of the city. I needed the light. I couldn't stay in the dark. Not now. I crawled sideways, keeping my eyes fixed on the dark maw of the hallway. My hand swept across the dusty floor, searching for the phone. My fingers brushed against the cool plastic. I snatched it, my grip so tight I thought the cracked screen might shatter completely. I jabbed the flashlight icon on. The beam shot out, shaky but alive. I swept it across the hallway entrance. The black door was still there. The crack of darkness was still visible. It hadn't moved. It was waiting. A sudden, violent crackle erupted from the corner of the room, followed by an explosive hiss of static. I yelped, a strangled sound, and spun around, dropping the phone again. The room was bathed in the flickering, strobing light of the television screen. It had turned on by itself. The screen was a churning blizzard of black and white noise, a million angry insects crawling over each other. The sound was deafening, a solid wall of white noise that vibrated through the floorboards and into my teeth. What the hell is going on? I scrambled for the remote on the coffee table, my hands shaking so badly I knocked over a stack of old magazines. I found it, aimed it at the screen, and mashed the power button. Nothing. I mashed it again. Again. The static just roared on, indifferent. I looked at the wall outlet. The TV was plugged in. I could just pull the plug. It was a simple solution, a logical step, but I was frozen in place. My gaze was trapped by the screen. There was something in the noise, a pattern. My eyes strained, trying to make sense of the chaos. The static seemed to coalesce, for just a fraction of a second. The random dots and dashes swirled together into a shape, a face. It was pale, indistinct, visible for less than a heartbeat. Its features were stretched, distorted by the noise, but the expression was unmistakable. A silent scream, a mouth pulled wide in a rictus of pure agony. It was there, and then it was gone, dissolved back into the meaningless snow. My soul flew away. Did I see that? Was that real? Or was my brain, starved of sense and sleep, just inventing monsters in the static? The TV clicked off. The sudden plunge back into darkness and silence was more jarring than the noise had been. The absence of the roar left a ringing in my ears. I stood there, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The only light was the weak, forgotten beam of my phone lying on the floor. I bent down to pick it up, and it rang. The sound, that familiar, horrible ringtone, ripped through the stillness. It was so loud it felt like it was coming from inside my own skull. My hand recoiled from the phone as if it were red hot. It vibrated on the floor, the screen lighting up with the words I now dreaded more than death. Unknown number. This was it, the next warning, the next instruction, another piece of my cage being slotted into place. Don't answer it, a part of my mind screamed. Just let it ring. Let it go to voicemail. It's a trick. They're all tricks. But what if it wasn't? What if this was the one call that mattered, the one that explained everything, the one that told me how to get out? That tiny, stupid sliver of hope. It was a disease. My hand trembled as I reached down and picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the green icon. I could hear my ragged breathing echoing in the small room. I slid my thumb across the screen. I put the phone to my ear, bracing myself for the sound of my own voice, ragged and torn by panic. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice a dry rasp. Silence. Not static. Just a clean, open line. Then a voice spoke. It wasn't mine. It was calm. It was serene. It was impossibly, unnaturally cold, like the surface of a frozen lake. It was a voice without texture, without emotion, genderless and smooth. It spoke with a perfect, unhurried cadence. "He couldn't save you." My blood froze. I couldn't breathe. My throat closed up. What is this? Who is this? Who is this? I managed to choke out. The voice continued as if I hadn't spoken. The calm was the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. It was the calm of absolute certainty, the calm of a god or a machine. He tried. He screamed and he warned and he fought. He broke the mirrors so you couldn't see us. He told you to block the vents so you couldn't hear us. He told you not to look out the window where we were waiting. He made you barricade the door so you would feel safe. A shiver runs down the spine. The words washed over me, a tide of ice water. Every action I had taken, every desperate bid for survival, was being listed off like items on a grocery list. "He did all of that to keep you from us," the voice said. The faintest trace of something that might have been amusement entered its tone. It was a cold, clinical amusement, like a scientist observing a failed experiment. "All he did was trap you with us." The black door in the hallway, the face in the static, the thing that pretended to be Kowski. They weren't trying to get in. They were already here. They had always been here. "What do you want?" I whimpered, sliding down to the floor, my back against the sofa. My entire body was shaking uncontrollably. "Now," the voice said, ignoring my question, its serenity a crushing weight. "It's my turn." Click. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand. The call was over. The screen went dark. And then, silence. But this was a new kind of silence. It wasn't the heavy, watchful silence from before. It was a final silence, a vacuum. The storm outside seemed to have died down. The hum of the city was gone. Even the old building's usual groans and creaks had ceased. The scratching in the walls had stopped. The TV was dead. The impossible door in the hallway, I didn't dare look, but I could feel its presence had receded. It was over. The game was over. For a long moment, I just sat there on the floor, in the dark, clutching my phone. My mind was a complete blank. I couldn't process the finality of that voice, of those words. I was a bug in a jar, and the lid had just been screwed on tight. I had to get out. The thought was a tiny spark in the void, a primal instinct kicking in after the higher functions of my brain had shut down. Out. I had to get out. My eyes shot to the front door. My beautiful, solid, barricaded front door. The heavy oak chair was wedged under the knob. The deadbolt was thrown. The chain was latched. It was my fortress, my final, pathetic stand. It was my only way out. Slowly, shakily, I got to my feet. I used the sofa to pull myself up. My legs felt like they were made of wet sand. I aimed the phone's light at the door. It looked just as I had left it, a bastion of false hope. I took a step towards it, then another. The floorboards didn't creak. The silence was absolute. I was halfway across the room when I heard it. A sound. It was small, precise, metallic. Skrrr! I froze. The sound came from the front door. It was a slow, grinding noise, the sound of metal turning against metal under immense steady pressure. Click. My heart stopped. I knew that sound. I had made that sound myself not an hour ago. It was the deadbolt. It was being unlocked. My eyes were wide, staring at the door. The beam from my phone shook violently. This is impossible. The deadbolt can only be turned from the inside. A faint, almost delicate clink followed. The chain. The little metal nub sliding along its track. Then another sound. A short, sharp cash. The lock in the doorknob itself. One by one. Methodical. Unhurried. Patient. The locks on my front door were being unfastened. From the inside. My back pressed against the wall. The phone's light trembled in my hand, the beam dancing a frantic jig on the solid wood of my front door. My eyes were stretched wide, locked onto the small brass turning knob of the deadbolt. I had watched my own hand turn it less than an hour ago. Now, I was watching it turn back. This is impossible. The sound was a slow, deliberate scrape, a metallic groan that seemed to last for an eternity. It was the sound of purpose, of an action being completed without haste or panic. It was the sound of inevitability. My muscles tensed up, every fiber in my body screaming to run, to hide, to do anything but stand here and watch my last sanctuary be undone. But I was frozen in place. My feet were nailed to the floor. Click. The deadbolt disengaged. The sound was a gunshot in the stillness. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drumbeat in the sudden vacuum of sound that followed. I couldn't breathe. My throat was dry, a desert of fear. A moment passed, then another sound, a faint, delicate rattle. Chink-a-link. Slide. The security chain. The small bead of metal slid smoothly along its track. its journey ending with a soft tap as it came free. I had put it there for peace of mind. What a joke! What the hell is going on? My gaze dropped to the doorknob. I knew what was coming next. I waited for it, my mind a churning vortex of disbelief and terror. The air was so thick that breathing was difficult. Catch! The final lock turned. It was done. The door was open. Unlocked. Unlatched. Free. And then, nothing. Nothing happened. The door remained closed. The knob didn't turn. No one came in. No sound came from the hallway outside. The building was silent. The city was silent. My world had shrunk to this single room and the unlocked door that led out of it. I stood there for what felt like a lifetime. The useless beam of my phone still pointed at the door. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. A cold sweat was breaking out on the back of my neck. Why? Why unlock the door and not open it? Why go through the methodical process of dismantling my defenses only to stop at the final step? The cold voice on the phone echoed in my head. Its serenity was more menacing than any scream. He did all of that to keep you from us. All he did was trap you with us. My blood froze. My eyes scanned the room, darting from the darkened kitchen entrance to the pitch-black maw of the hallway where that other door had appeared. The mirror, the vents, the window, the door. It wasn't a fortress. It was a cage. It wasn't designed to keep them out. It had never been about keeping them out. They were already in. They were always in. The calls, the warnings, my own panicked voice from the future. It was all a script to make me lock myself inside, to make me seal my own tomb, to make me the willing architect of my own confinement. And the unlocking of the door? It wasn't an invitation for something to enter. It was a statement, a final, triumphant declaration. The game was over. The cage was no longer needed. A shiver runs down the spine. The stillness in the apartment shifted. It was no longer the heavy, listening stillness of a predator waiting outside. It was the deep, placid stillness of the predator that is already in the room with you, watching you, savoring the moment you finally realize it. My mind went blank. The logic that had been my shield, my anchor, was gone. It had been a faulty instrument from the start, trying to measure a reality it couldn't comprehend. All that was left was the raw, animal core of me, cornered and trembling in the dark. I had to get out. I had to move. But where? The front door was a lie. The window looked out onto an alley where they were waiting. The rest of the apartment. It was their space now. I was just a guest on borrowed time. I took a single shuffling step backward, away from the door. My heel made no sound on the old wooden floor. The silence was perfect. It ate sound. It was a presence in itself. I took another step. Creak. The sound was tiny, almost imperceptible. A slight dry protest of wood under weight. It came from behind me. Right behind me. Time seemed to stop. My whole body froze. It was a sound I knew, a familiar sound of this old apartment. But it wasn't a sound I had made. I was standing in the middle of the living room. There was nothing behind me but 40 feet of empty air and the sofa pushed against the far wall. There was absolutely no one. But there was. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My neck was locked in place, my gaze fixed on the shadows near the kitchen. I felt it. It wasn't a feeling in my mind. It was a physical sensation. The air behind me grew heavy, compressing, as if a great weight was displacing it. A chill radiated outward. Not the damp cold of the storm, but a dry, sterile cold that leached the warmth from my skin. It was the cold of a deep cave, of a place that had never known sunlight. Sound seemed to bend around it, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen suddenly dying as if it had been swallowed. I could feel its attention on the back of my neck like a physical touch, vast, patient, ancient. The voice on the phone was the herald. This was the master. "Now, it's my turn." That was it. The final, explosive spark. The last vestige of reason in my brain evaporated in a flash of pure, unthinking terror. I was no longer Jack Miller, data entry clerk. I was just a creature, cornered and about to die. Reflexively, I spun around. My scream died in my throat, choked off by the sight of nothing. The room was empty. The sofa, the coffee table, the far wall. All exactly as they should be. But the feeling was still there. Stronger. Closer. The cold was intense now, a pocket of Arctic air in the stuffy room. The pressure was immense. I felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing me, crushing the air from my lungs. My eyes, wild with panic, darted around, searching for a weapon. For anything. My gaze fell on the floor near the entertainment center. A glint of light. A shard from the television screen that had exploded earlier, or possibly from the bathroom mirror I had shattered. It didn't matter. It was long, jagged, a crescent of dark glass with an edge that looked viciously sharp. Without a moment's hesitation, I scrambled for it. My fingers closed around the smooth, cool glass. I didn't feel the edge slice into my palm. I didn't see the dark blood welling up. I just held it, gripping it like a dagger, and raised it in front of me. I held my ground against the empty space, a madman threatening the air. The cold intensified. The presence didn't retreat. It advanced. I could feel it moving toward me, a slow, inexorable tide of nothingness. My whole body shakes uncontrollably. I took a stumbling step back, then another, my bare feet slapping against the wood floor. My back hit the wall next to the hallway entrance. Trapped. Nowhere left to go. My phone. The thought pierced through the storm of my fear. My phone was still clutched in my other hand, the one not holding the glass shard. The screen was dark. It was my only connection to the world I knew, a world that was now gone, a world that had existed an hour ago. An hour ago, I was Jack Miller, annoyed at the rain. An hour ago, I was safe. What if? Could it be? The presence was almost on top of me. I could feel the life being drawn out of me, the warmth, the energy. It was a void that was about to consume me. My mind raced, not with logic, but with a single, desperate, impossible idea. To warn him, to save him, to tell the man I was 60 minutes ago what was coming. My thumb, slick with my own blood, fumbled across the smooth screen of the phone. I swiped it open. My vision was blurry, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control them. I jabbed at the recent calls list. The screen glowed, a holy beacon in the crushing dark. There it was, at the top of the list. Unknown number. My thumb hovered over it. The cold was inside me now, a deep chill in my bones. I felt the presence loom over me, a final suffocating shadow blotting out everything. I was out of time. He was out of time. I slammed my thumb down on the number. The phone began to dial. I lifted it to my ear, the shard of glass held out in front of me like a talisman against the dark. One ring. The sound was distant, tinny. 2 rings. I could hear the phone on the other end, ringing in an apartment that was still safe, An apartment where the lights still worked, where the mirrors were intact. The presence descended. A crushing final weight. I felt my consciousness begin to fray, my sense of self dissolving into the vast, cold emptiness. The line clicked open. I heard a faint shuffling, then a hesitant, weary voice. His voice. My voice. "Hello?" The sound of my own ignorant bliss, my own impending doom, shattered the last restraint within me. A dam of terror broke, and everything I had felt tonight, the confusion, the fear, the agony, erupted out of me in a single, raw, guttural scream. It was the sound of a soul being torn apart. I opened my mouth, the phone pressed hard against my ear, the cold consuming me, and I gave him the only gift I had left. The warning, the key, the first link in the chain. "Don't answer the door!" I shrieked, my voice tearing from my throat, a perfect echo of the terror I'd heard an hour ago. "No matter what you hear, don't open the door!"